Welcome to a special edition of El Dorado Shines. On this edition, the final edition for 2014, we'll be taking a look at the performance of the natural resources and the environment sector. Joining me today is the Honorable Robert Prasad, Minister of Natural Resources and the Environment. Minister Prasad, thank you for being here.
Thank you very much.
We know as we look closely at the activities in the natural resources sector that there sometimes is a thin line between balancing more investment, which sometimes translates to disrupting the environment, and protecting the environment on the other hand. I'd like for us to start off by you giving us a synopsis of some of the policies that are geared towards protecting the environment while at the same time encouraging investment.
That's a challenge that countries such as ours will always face, where we have this a sizable part of our country. In fact, if you look at 85% of our land mass is covered in tropical rainforests. We also have very sensitive biodiversity systems in different parts of the country, and they vary whether you go to the wetlands, the savanna areas, you look in terms of some of the other watersheds that we have. And so it becomes a bit more challenging, but also with a challenge present a number of opportunities. And over the years, we've been able to demonstrate that we can overcome and address those challenges by, at the same time, presenting opportunities in a number of ways. And the opportunities that I refer to is not only about exploitation and development of our natural resources that exist in a part of the general environment and part of that, as I said, that and reside within that sensitive biodiversity or within the rainforested area. But also we've been able to present that to how we manage, how we utilize, how we develop to as an opportunity whereby the country has been able to benefit. So we've been able to, as one can describe, have the better of both worlds. That is, develop our natural resources, but at the same time, bring about economic benefits that our ecosystem and the eco-services that our rainforest and our rich biodiversity present. And so that is the approach that we've taken. We have not taken the approach where it's one or the other. But for us, we can have both, and we have demonstrated that. But they will be and continue to be that challenge. It's not a one-off. It's not an effort that you can say, well, we've accomplished and let's fold our arms. But rather, it's constant work, and sometimes they vary in terms of intensity. And it requires a bit more flexibility, a bit more dynamism. And at the end of the day, too, innovation as to how it is do we have that balance, how do we maintain in terms of protection, management of our environment, but at the same time, developing our natural resources and creating opportunities. And the means and the way in which we can do that, too, is through the attraction of investment, both local as well as foreign investment. And that has been the main focus of the ministry for this year in terms of bringing about the type of framework. One, when we started the year, we developed, as it were, an implementation framework. And we said this will be the year of implementation, one, in terms of our legislation, two, our policies, our plans, and working and engaging stakeholders. And the underlying objective or the underlying thrust of that has been how it is we can ensure that we regulate or create, as it were, that equilibrium in terms of environmental management as well as development of our natural resources.
As we talk about regulation and so on, the issue of transparency sometimes come up. And we know that in many countries around the world that export oil, for instance, they're oil rich. They also have a dilemma in which the economic benefits has not trickled down. Mm-hmm. I know that Guyana is pursuing certain initiatives, for instance, the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. Could you tell us a bit about that and what it means?
You know, one of the hallmarks of our government, and particularly within various sectors, including this sector, is how can we make it, as it were, transparent and much more accountable. And if you look at the feature of this administration is taking steps, whether it's procurement, and I want to point out that we're the only country in the whole Caribbean region that has a dedicated and a comprehensive procurement act. People don't know that. We've also subscribed to a number of international conventions. And yes, we continue to be bad girl and from time to time have the accusing fingers point in our direction in terms of doing much more. We've also seen the issue in terms where there is a huge deficit between reality and perception on the issue of transparency and corruption. where on the real corruption issue, we score very high, but in the perception, due to a number of factors, we are not doing so well either. And I think our fundamental issue has not been able to communicate and to be a bit more insightful in terms of getting the public and stakeholders. And what we've sought to do within the natural resources sector is to build on that, build on what we've had at the state and what's already within our legal system, whether it's the Parliament. We've appeared on a number of occasions, our agencies, myself, to the Parliamentary Sectoral Committee on Natural Resources, chaired by the opposition. Every single question that has been asked in the Parliament, we've answered. All our reports have now been, I've made that one of my priorities, to bring all our annual reports up to order and make them current. We've had some where you have 8 or 9 years behind. We've been able to do that. We have deliberately reached out to a number of organizations to invite them in, to work with them, to engage them and create a platform, all with the aim of ensuring that there is that feeling and that appreciation of our efforts, even whether it's indigenous groups, human rights groups, whether it's environmental groups, whether they're external groups. We've sought to create that type of arrangements. Stakeholder groups, whether it's the Miners Association, the Forestry Association, different groupings within the sector, we've sought to reach out. And we've moved it to another level now, whereby on the forestry side, we're now actively engaged with the EU FLECT, where we call the Voluntary Partnership Arrangement, whereby to look at legality within the forestry sector. And we're moving very quickly, and the last quarter of next year, we hope to conclude that. And it's something that we have been very, very much committed to. The Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, targeting primarily the mining sector too, is another global initiative that we have voluntarily subscribed ourselves to. And in fact, today we now have a link on the EITI website. We've just spent in excess of $25 million in a consultancy to develop, as it were, the scoping study and preparing us for that, a firm out of the UK. And they've done the preliminary report, and they're due to come back very soon to complete that, so that our membership in the EITI can, as it were, can be advanced and can be opened up. So those are some of the initiatives that we're doing, because we are aware of that. And it's no use that we put our head in the sand and say that this is not an issue of concern. It is an issue of concern, and that is why we've taken that very proactive and that aggressive approach. And I invite other stakeholders and others who want to understand and to be aware of what's taking place within the sector to come in and see what's happening, to make themselves available, as we will make ourselves and our technical staff. And I've given instructions to all our 8 agencies within the ministry that they must have an open door policy in terms of engaging. And so much so that you've had opposition MPs, and so they have, as it were, access to those staff. They don't even have to go through me. Have access to their queries, issues of representation, as well as a number of other organizations. So it is one thing good to have it within our laws. It is one thing good to have the policy of support. But for me, what is much more important is how you realize that and how you make that much more practical. And that is what our approach has been. And that's why when we've had a number of issues that came up over the past year, we've taken a very open approach. We've taken a very open book approach to where we said, these are the facts. Judge for yourself. Forget about the sensationalism.
You've mentioned a number of initiatives that government, the ministry is taking as it relates to transparency, being more open and accountable. We know that foreign direct investment in the sector is critical, as it is in every sector, to the growth and development of the local economy. We've seen over the last several months in 2014 issues being raised as it relates to certain foreign investors in the natural resources sector, specifically in the forestry sector. We've had some other issues in mining. Have these issues that would have been raised over the last several months served to hurt the country's image? And are there any merit in at least some of the issues that were raised as it relates to the operations of foreign companies here in Guyana and the conditions under which they're allowed to operate?
First of all, let me make it absolutely clear. Foreign companies operate in accordance with the laws of Guyana. And there is no discrimination in terms of in favor of foreign as against local. I think everyone across the political spectrum of our country agrees that foreign direct investment is essential to catapulting and propelling growth in our national economy, whether it's in this sector, the tourism sector, the finance sector, or whatever other sector within our country. And it's good, and all of us should be proud of the fact that people want to bring their hard-earned investment dollars to develop opportunities for the people of Guyana. So I don't think there is any ambiguity in terms of the national consensus. The specific in terms of the details of each investment is also very clear and very open. These are not secretive as some may want to paint it. And let's refer to, take for instance, you talk about the forestry sector or even some within the mining sector. These are agreements that are known. There are no special favors. There are nothing that has been done under the table. Everything has been made public, whatever is available. Documents were requested by the Parliament as relates to some of those particular matters that you raised. All were supplied. The one came back and said, well, there was a violation of any law, of any procedure, or any preference. All those were made to the public, and even some were made available to the elected representatives when Parliament was in session. We made those. Even the last day the Parliament was supposed to be met, I've submitted a complete dossier of additional documentation. So there were no special favors. They were, as it were, as was generated. And that is why I think we need to sometimes see things for the merit. But I had a meeting with some of the staff within the sector, and I made a point which I think has some validity, and that is that whenever we see these criticisms, we must not, as it were, ignore, or we see these commentaries. We know some of them have their own intentions and their own objective in a certain political context, and for other special interests. If one is to, as it were, subtract that from the equation, we need to, as it were, always pay attention to what people say about the sector, whether it's particular investment or what we do. And I've encouraged the staff to pay attention and see what it is we can do better. And what I found was the primary problem was the lack of understanding and appreciation of how the sector operates and how the public perceive that sector. So there was a disconnect. And so one of the priorities in terms of going forward is how can we bridge that disconnect into how it is. A lot of people don't really understand and appreciate how the forestry sector operates. They don't know how it takes to get the wood to build the chair we sit on, or the wood that is framed in the house. They don't understand that process and what it entails and how it gets there. And a lot of it is that we believe that people know. And sometimes people do not fully appreciate that. So it is bridging that connect and bringing more people within the framework of knowledge and appreciation of what's happening. The same too with mining. Sometimes people say, oh, that is how you get gold. I mean, in fact, or that is how you get diamond, how you go about to the extractive. This is how you do mining. And it is sometimes misrepresented, and that is what the public only sees. So it is how do we bridge that disconnect, and I think that has been one of the failures on our part in bringing more people, bringing a better understanding, a full appreciation as to what is taking place.
Perception, public perception, as you rightfully pointed out, plays a role, specifically as it relates to what people know as what is acceptable. And let me expand on that. For instance, I have some figures before me here that shows that for 2014, log exports would have increased over 2013 figures. And many times people associate this with massive deforestation activities and so on. But is there a limit in keeping with our commitments under the REDD+ initiative, low carbon development strategy? Is there a limit within which we can operate? And are we within that limit? Have we exceeded that limit?
There's something we call a maximum allowable cut. And it starts from the concession level, whereby, and this is how we operate, we do 20 cubic meter within a 25-year cycle per hectare. We're one of the few countries in the world that enforce and that have this type of outlook. What this means for the country in terms of our entire forest estate, which is in excess of 12.5 million hectares, is that as a country as a whole, we can only extract just around 1.3 million cubic meters of lumber per year. Right now, we are struggling as a country to even reach 500,000 cubic meter. And if you speak to people who operate within the forestry sector, the issue is underproduction. So this perception of large-scale deforestation and what have you, I think it's totally a case, as I said, of misunderstanding what is happening. We're happy with the fact that, in fact, we've seen increased production, jumping up just above, I think, 40% or thereabout, an increase of about 40% over 2013, 2014.
Yes.
But that is coming out also at a time when our rate of deforestation has gone down. Because under the monitoring, reporting, and verification system of the country as a whole, where it takes into account change in forest, we've seen a decrease. And in the year last year, 2013, when we had the highest gold production, that very year, we've seen an decrease in deforestation, primarily within the mining sector itself.
So although we had that increase, and that was a record year.
That was a record year. So what it points to is that the monitoring, the enforcement, and the systems that we have, and it goes back to your earlier question, how do we deal with that challenge and at the same time looking at the issues of investment and development within? And so you illustrated the point with forestry, but we are well below our, as it were, as agreed to with our partnership with Norway, as well as we agreed to at the multilateral level in terms of a rate of deforestation. And you have the issue whereby you have underproduction and you have a lot of idle capacity within the forestry sector itself too. And so those are some of the realities. I mean, the ultimate solution for us to do and to deal with some of that and to maximize its value added. And people say, well, the issue of log export. Our inability to move in a very dynamic and a very sustainable and viable value added sector is the issue of energy. Because you have to compete. Yeah. You have to compete.
Cheap energy,
yeah, cheap and reliable energy.
Over the last couple of months, there would have been some specific challenges in the mining industry. We know that the price for gold globally has declined, and as a result, miners here in Guyana would have been facing some hardships. What measures would government have taken to try to alleviate that pressure on the mining industry and miners specifically?
First of all, it's important that we recognize that gold prices in the mining sector are very cyclical. There are periods where prices shoot up, and there are periods, and they tend to operate within a 3 to 4 year period. If you check going back from the 1970s, how the movement in terms of prices. So a lot of it is cyclical. We've had good days, and we have had not too good days. Last year, what we saw, well, this year, as compared with last year, we've seen that prices have dropped by about 22%. That has been the average drop in terms of gold prices in the world market. We have absolutely no control. And in fact, even our production and export on that market is insignificant, as it were. And if you look in terms of our declaration numbers too have also fallen about the same, in the same range, the same percentage as about 22%. We recognize that, and that's why we've had a very a multi-sectoral committee starting the year, even last year, as we ended the year, to look at the sector and see what we can do to adjust. Any sector that sees its global price drop off by 22% would, in fact, have to, as it were, to readjust, to refocus, and see how it is we can change the business of mining. And that is what, and the fact that our mining sector today, it will change next year, but our mining sector today is primarily small and medium scale, makes it a bit more vulnerable. Next year, when we have 2 large mines start up, which will be very large mines, that itself, as it were, would bring, as it were, some level of stability and cushion to the sector. And so, starting the year, we've sought to engage the sector, how it is we can readjust, because we know the prices will not. Last year, you ended at prices at about just around 1380, 1382. This morning, it's about 1197 US per ounce. Yeah. It went down as low as 1127, 1140 several weeks ago. But you've had this overall drop in about 22%. So we've had to, and the primary focus is to work with the sector in adjusting in terms of how have we sought to do this? First, improving the cost of in terms of your cost of production. How can you reduce that in different levels? And so that we've been looking at some cost reduction effort. What can government do? And we've looked at a number of concessions, whether it's for vehicle clearing in terms of the bureaucracy, in terms of people getting capital equipment, and how it is we can speed up the process of doing business with the different agencies. We've also looked in terms of making much more land available, because people talk about the issue of using unproductive land. They're not getting as much as production, as it were. That's why after a number of years, we've had a successful auction that we started out for one day. We had to end up making it a 5-day affair, like an entire. We intended it to be a one-day match, and we started, and it ended up as a test match. Given the fact that there was this expanded interest within the sector and our effort to help, also a number of lotteries were held. The second issue too that we focused on was improving efficiency, and it's a struggle of the industry for decades, where efficiency has been in the range of 30 to 45% or thereabout. So that means that if you're running an operations and that is your level of recovery, you can imagine you're losing more than actually gain. And so we've looked at new technologies, we've looked at efficient technologies, and we've looked at clean technologies. So much so that we created a special, what we call a special Mercury Fund, which is targeted at improving recoveries. We've had a number of training by the GGMC in terms of rolling that out. You know, we've started our mining school, where we've hundreds of miners and potential miners in different disciplines, so that we can bring the technical know-how up, as it were, in this area. The miners themselves said that they want to bring in their fuel, and after meeting the president and engagement with government, the Miners Association today, they are in possession of a license to bring in fuel for the sector. And so those are some of the interventions, and there are others that we are currently in discussion that we will have to examine. So it's an ongoing process in this regard.
What feedback would you have been getting from miners, small, medium-scale miners, as it relates to the interventions that were made, as far as it goes to help them?
Mm-hmm. I think that there's a sense of appreciation. There's a sense, too, that the government cares, because mining is a very critical sector of the economy. It's not only for gold, but also we've seen what's happening with bauxite globally, bauxite prices, what's taking place. We're looking to develop other resources within the sector. We recognize that this is a very important sector for the long-term growth and development of our national economy. And that is why, from the president, the cabinet, and there's been sustained as well as intense attention given to what is taking place and how it is that we can continue to reach out and to work together. It has been trying to work together in terms of ensuring that you have the type of interventions, but also the type of response from the sector to these interventions. And so there is that general trust and outlook of the sector that there is a government that is paying attention to the issues. We can't control the international factors, where you have gold prices dropping as much as 22%, and you've seen decline too in terms of what's happening. If I use the example of bauxite, which is another and a very critical issue with sector or subsector within our country too. But it's how it is we can work with investors, support a small, medium, and also look in terms of long-term strategic positioning of our sector. We cannot always do business that we know as the way we're accustomed to. We have to adjust, and we've seen our miners themselves. Take, for instance, when there was this concern about the government's ratification of the Minamata Convention, that is the removal of mercury within the mining sector. We've seen the miners themselves taking, as it were, initiatives, bringing in mercury-free technology, working with us, looking at how it is we can move that forward. You've seen that willingness of the sector itself to adjust not only to the economic imperatives, but also with the economic imperatives of mining, also the social as well as the environmental. But there's still work to be done.
Yes, the GGDMA has also pointed out the importance of miners themselves being better educated, better equipped, more knowledgeable of how the sector operates. We live in a world now driven by technology, and as you mentioned, the mining school is in operation, and GGDMA has said that they hope that miners themselves could take steps to reduce the production cost to improve recovery. If you could tell us quickly, just moving on a bit because we're almost out of time, how optimistic are you that maybe in 2015 or a little further afield we will actually find oil or gas in commercial quantities?
What I can tell you is that there is intense interest. What I can also tell you is that there are two companies that are very close to the point whereby they will commence exploration drilling. And we do hope that we will see one of them should start sometime April of next year. That is Exxon. And we're also optimistic that Repsol would also be advancing. They're looking at the interpretation of the seismic data, which they've collected, to complete that exercise between January and February. CGX, to which has also seen some sort of a foreign input in terms of larger companies coming into the fray. They're doing a lot of seismic work in terms of gathering the data so that they can go about the process of identifying. There are also a number of applications in terms of our offshore, especially deep offshore, which we're looking at. So next year should also see some renewed activity. This, if you understand the process of oil exploration, it is more or less a three to 5 year in terms of preparing, going about out there, doing work, very costly undertaking. Take, for instance, ExxonMobil drilling, which will start next year, will cost in excess of $300 million in this regard. So there's a lot of activities. You don't see them here. You don't read about it too much, and because we also don't want, as it were, to let people there be unrealistic expectations. Mm-hmm. The business of oil is a very risky one. And it also requires, as it were, 50% good geology and 50% luck in terms of dealing with it. Some companies, some say there's 1 in 10 chances. Some companies have luck in, take, for instance, 5 in 10. But we do hope that very soon Guyana will be in a position where we've had a commercial discovery so that we can develop, as it were, this sector. The resources are out there, the potential are out there. It's just a matter of us, as it were, getting the right technical work. And we've seen the companies' interest. Companies would not be sinking, as it were, and investing these large sums if there wasn't that real possibility. And the data and the science has shown it. The U.S. Geological Surveys have done it, shown that we have in excess of 16 billion barrels within our offshore. So there is that potential.
It's really just a matter of time.
It is a matter of time, but just to see there's a lot of work, a lot of activities
to be done along the way.
Yeah, there are a lot. And we are preparing the country, as it were, in terms of human resources, in terms of looking at the framework. We've just finished one of the things we've done this year, and Cabinet has approved, is our national oil and gas policy, which we've worked very closely with the Commonwealth Secretariat. And early in the new year, we would be moving in terms of looking at engaging more stakeholders in its implementation.
We've been chatting with the Honorable Robert Prasad, Minister of Natural Resources and the Environment. He has been giving us a summary of the operations, the performance of the natural resources sector for 2014. Minister Prasad, thank you for coming in, and we do look forward to hearing more from you and other operators in the sector.
Thank you very much. And happy holidays to everyone.
Check us out on the internet for this and every episode of Eldorado Shines. Just go to YouTube, search for Eldorado Shines, and start watching. Or like us on Facebook and receive instant updates. You've been watching Eldorado Shines. Do join us again next week for another program. Until then, do remember that we all have a role to play in protecting the environment.